Hey folks, welcome to an overview video for chapter number 9. Today we're going to talk about paragraphs, topic sentences, and transition. So this week's chapter, specifically chapter 9, goes into depth about how paragraphs should be structured, basically. So some of the information might seem a little repetitive. Take what you need to know, take what you don't know, and add it to your noggin. Take notes as you need to, and here we go. So chapter 9 opened with effective means for writing a paragraph. It talked about how paragraphs are units of discourse that organize, recall, and share information effectively, and they also provide visual cues to help readers, not leaders. Pardon my mistakes. I'm always typing these up at the probably my busiest times. Anyways, the whole purpose of paragraphs is to chunk information into manageable parts. So think about how phone numbers are more easily remembered when we break them up into parts. The advertisement that comes to mind is the one for Empire, 800-588-2300 Empire today. You remember that ad? The way that they chunk those numbers and then obviously add in the tune, it helps us to remember what was said and when it was said. So paragraphs function in the same way. Their placement and structure is extremely important, and it all depends on the writer's style, the tone, the voice that they're going for, and also the kind of writing that they're trying to do. So newspapers have different types of paragraphs versus online blogs versus academic journals. Paragraphs follow a very logical building upon the text thesis format, and they work in harmony with other paragraphs. So each paragraph should serve a specific purpose that relates back to the thesis. This is why when we usually have you writing an essay, we say, all right, see if you can come up with a thesis. And it's a working thesis because your thesis may change as you work on your body paragraphs, and that's perfectly okay. The topic sentence of each of your body paragraphs should relate back to the thesis statement. So whatever elements you discuss in the thesis statement, for example, if I'm talking about an advertisement utilizing what do I want to say? Maybe an advertisement is appealing to the viewer's emotions. Then in my topic sentence, I have to use some element of appealing to viewers' emotions in that sentence. Never, ever, ever put quotes in your topic sentences. Quotes are only meant for the body, but the body of the body. This contains the supporting sentences, the evidence, the commentary. The issue with putting quotes either in a topic or conclusion is that you don't give it time, you don't give it room, you don't give it space to kind of marinate with the reader. And you don't provide any commentary, so we never really understand what was the point of this quote being used here. How does it enhance the argument that you're trying to make? A concluding sentence or a conclusion summarizes the main point and it wraps up the paragraph to transition into the next idea. Readers expect each paragraph to focus on a single topic and to find a clear topic sentence for easy navigation. So without a clear topic sentence, we as readers don't really know what to expect. When I skim any kind of reading, I typically take a look at the first sentence of the body paragraph. I take a look at the last sentence of the body paragraph. And then I skim through and look for like important or big words in the rest of the body. That's how I personally skim. I mean, everyone has their own method of skimming. But whenever I'm quickly reading through a piece of work, this is how I figure out, okay, this is what's going on here, this is what's going on here. So make sure that your paragraphs are following a common organizational scheme and utilize that transitional language for clarity between your paragraphs. As we mentioned before, your body paragraphs start with topic sentences that should identify what the topic to be discussed in this paragraph is, as well as its role, so linking it back to the thesis statement. We also want to incorporate some use of transitional phrases for smooth flow, to incorporate a smooth flow from one idea to the next. They're like, think of topic sentences like mini thesis statements for each paragraph. So they contain both the main idea, aka the subject, and a controlling idea, whatever our stance as the writer is on that subject. An effective topic sentence should make the reader confident about the paragraph's content. Test your sentence's clarity by having someone else predict what your paragraph is going to be about based on the topic sentence. And if their prediction is inaccurate, that means that your topic sentence needs some work. A good topic sentence will specify what will follow in the paragraph. It would include the subject that was discussed in the thesis as well as the writer's opinion on it without using first or second person pronouns, folks. It will be straightforward. It'll be easy to understand. It will not have any kind of supporting details. It's just a general statement. All of the supporting details are going to come later in that same paragraph. You're going to want to use some kind of engaging vocabulary to kind of set the tone for that paragraph. As we develop paragraphs, I want y'all to pay special attention to transitions. Stay away from cliches like in conclusion. I've talked to you guys about this many times before, and still we see in conclusion being used over and over again. It's time to kind of consider stepping away from the basic and experiment with other kinds of concluding transitions. You have given these points, all things considered, in the end, ultimately, overall, and so on and so forth. There's a variety to pick from. Get creative. My suggestion would be, if you need to, create a quick reference chart of some of your favorite transitions and, like add to them and use. You don't want to like dip into your favorites over and over again. Like, it would be really, 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 really grating for a reader to read the word additionally like 15 times in your paper. So vary the additionally with to continue or in addition or furthermore, Vary your transitions. Your supporting sentences can include reasons, facts, statistics, quotes, examples. All of these are chosen based on the purpose of the writing and the intended audience. Do not ever assume that evidence speaks for itself. Always, always, always follow a quote or anything that requires citation by explaining its relevance and telling the reader, how does this support the paragraph's main idea? I told you guys this already, but again, never end the paragraph with a quote. Always end with your own analysis, your own commentary. Your essay is your work. Your writing is your work. We want to know more about what you are thinking, what analysis is going on in your brain, not necessarily what other people have already done. Your concluding sentences should draw together all of the ideas that have been raised without introducing new information, and it should give us a sense of closure. Please make sure, folks, you work on incorporating those transitions. So like I said, this chapter was a little repetitive because they are saying a lot of the same stuff over and over again, just slightly differently. A key point that I wanted to bring up from section 9.4 on transitions was that we absolutely need these folks to understand the connection between ideas. Use them. If your instructor is telling you, your writing is a little choppy or it doesn't have very much flow, it means you might need to reevaluate your usage of transitions. There are different types of transitions. So like I mentioned earlier, like literally a couple minutes ago, you might consider creating like a quick reference chart for yourself. In that quick reference chart, you can also distinguish between the different types of transitions we have. We have between sentences. They employ connecting words to emphasize relationships, obviously, between the sentences. You can always use the something old, something new approach, where you talk about although blah, 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 like something that we've just been discussing, and then you jump into the next half, the new idea. So that would help linking the old or a previous idea with the new that's coming up. Between paragraphs, we can also use transitions like forward-looking sentences and backward-looking sentences. Between sections, you might consider using some signposts. In the longer works, transitional paragraphs summarize and introduce new sections. I don't know if you, in wherever you are at in your 161, 162 journey, are going to need like an entire paragraph to serve as a transition, but it can if needed. I'm not sure if your course at the moment requires it, so definitely check with your instructor. If you are trying to make one entire paragraph its own transition. But honestly, transitions are best done when they're quick, smooth, easily integrated, and they don't really need to be very lengthy, to be honest. You can get away with doing super small transitions and not complicating your life because of them at all. So when you are using transitions, please be mindful of punctuation because they do require a comma or semicolon after them or before them. For example, is a type of transition. If I was using the word or the phrase, for example, in my paragraph, I would need to make sure that I have a comma after, for example. So example, comma, space, and then I continue my sentence. If I'm using the transition word like however, I could put a semicolon before the word however to kind of close up the chunk of the sentence beforehand. And then I would introduce a comma right after the word however, and then launch into the rest of my sentence. I've already said this before, vary your transitional language to prevent repetition. Make sure that your language aligns with the tone and the content level. It wouldn't really make sense to use the word consequently when you are trying to say something like, if you're not trying to indicate like a cause effect type relationship. It doesn't make sense to say likewise when you are trying to show that you're about to jump into a counter argument. That's when you might consider using something like although versus consequently or versus likewise. Body paragraphs. Again, a lot of stuff that we have already talked about. I think the key takeaway here is the text evidence part. So make sure that whatever text evidence or support or examples that you're using, they're specific, they're relevant, and detailed. You want to use text evidence that supports your point. Do not use text evidence as filler information. We don't want that kind of fluff. We want to go beyond the basics to provide a thorough discussion that enhances our understanding of this topic. Sure, you can include statistics, you can use research studies, examples, historical facts. That's fine. The evidence should lend credibility to your argument, but you want to make sure that you're not giving me text evidence just for the sake of giving me text evidence. There needs to be a purpose to it. You need to follow it with good, authentic analysis. So, paragraph step by step. Establish that main idea, start with a clear, focused topic sentence, then give me an explanation. Before you start throwing evidence at me, tell me a little bit about the topic sentence further. Set the scene, give me some background information that leads into the evidence. And then you want to support or you want to, excuse me, provide me that evidence, provide me the examples, the support. Use evidence that is directly relevant. Remember, the goal is not to use text evidence as filler or for summary purposes. It is to help you prove your argument as more correct. After you give me a quote, don't forget to cite it. Interpret the support or the evidence. Talk to us, the audience, the readers. Clarify, how does this evidence support the topic sentence? How does it relate back to the overall thesis? If you're using multiple pieces of evidence, you're going to make sure that each piece of evidence is fully explained and related back to the main idea before you move on to the next one. So you're going to be repeating step. So if I number this, that's 1, that's 2, 3, and 4. You are going to give me some kind of repetition of 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, or maybe even 3 and 4, 3 and 4, depending on whether or not you need extra explanation prior to jumping into a new piece of evidence. Always conclude by relating the paragraph back to the thesis, emphasize its relevance and importance. Body paragraphs can vary in length. You can use visual breaks and logical transitions to kind of signal a shift, but the basic idea is that you want to start a new paragraph when you introduce a new idea or a subclaim, or you might choose to emphasize a point or shift in discussion by making that its own paragraph. Sometimes, when paragraphs become way too lengthy and dense, we like to break them up, particularly at those transitions that signal some kind of shift. So, I think something that's really worked well for me has been making sure that none of my paragraphs are an entire page. Okay? If my paragraph is an entire page, that means I need to break it up somewhere because there's no way I can have one coherent thought for that length of time. Somewhere there's going to be a tiny shift, or somewhere I want one area emphasized over the rest. And that is where I'm going to break that ginormous chunk of paragraph into 2 or 3. If your paragraphs are too short and choppy, you might consider combining them for a more coherent flow. But before you start combining everything, make sure that whatever you are combining actually, makes sense. It goes together, it fits. Sometimes, if your paragraphs are short and choppy, it's just because you have not paid enough attention to them. You haven't added enough content to them. The number of your paragraphs is going to be determined by the needs of your argument and the development of your ideas. So, if you reflect back on high school, a lot of us grow up with the idea that, the 5 paragraph essay is the key model. We're going to follow it, we're going to need this. And to be honest, it's a fantastic model to start a writing process with. But you have to understand that your essays are never going to be limited to just 5 paragraphs. At some point you're going to be crafting essays that have like 10, 15, 20, 35 paragraphs. You have to kind of step away from the basic 5 paragraph essay mold from time to time. So let your argument determine how long your paper needs to be, how many paragraphs you need to develop. Don't rely on that 5 paragraph essay mold. Essentially, it's a great starting point. I'm not saying don't use it at all. I'm saying think beyond the 5 paragraph essay format. I apologize. Like I said, this is really lengthy information. I get it. Anything that you don't need to know, you're more than welcome to skip forward. But just as a quick overview, intro paragraphs, they always open with a hook. A lot of us have been using questions as a hook. I say stay away from them. Consider staying away from quotes as well. Using questions is very like middle school-ish. Using quotes, I am a little lackadaisical when it comes to citing stuff or finding resources that I don't necessarily need to find. And because we never really want to incorporate our actual, the resources that we're using to support our research, and that we need to analyze in our intro or conclusion paragraphs, I don't bother using quotes as my hook. Instead, I aim for the strong statement because everything else kind of has to be cited. If you use a statistic, you're going to need to cite it. If you use a quote, like say you wanted to use a famous quote by Martin Luther King, that's great, but you got to cite it. But I personally, like I said, I would say stay away from the quotes and definitely stay away from the questions. Anytime you raise a question in your essay, it makes the reader question, why are you asking me to do your job? Are you even sure that you know what you're talking about? So stay away from the questions. After you have opened with a hook, bridge the hook to the text and the author. So this is where you tell me who wrote what. And then you give me a very tiny summary of the text. I'd say no more than 3 to 4 sentences. Hit on the main ideas that you're going to be engaging with further in your essay. And then your last sentence of the intro is going to be your thesis. So a lot of this, or at least maybe half of this, should be a refresher from that basic 5 paragraph essay model that we talk about in high school. For those of us who, it's been some time, this would be a very good way to start practicing writing those intro paragraphs. Conclusion paragraphs, I call them the inverse of the intro, because where the intro ends with the thesis, the conclusion starts with the thesis, except we start the thesis, or we say the thesis, we type the thesis in different words and fresh words. Do not forget to use a concluding transition that is not in conclusion. You can, after your restated thesis, jump into some key points. Talk to us about what are the key takeaways that your essay reader should walk away with after they finish this paper. But obviously, don't draw it out. You spent the entire essay talking about these topics. Just give us a brief boom, boom, boom. Then I would suggest you talk about the so what. Why should people care about these topics? Start broadening the focus away from what you said in your body paragraphs, away from what the writers that you are referencing say. Instead, tell us, how does whatever the content that you talk about in your body paragraphs, how does all of that affect people in everyday lives? Shift the focus to show the implication of your argument on people in general, rather than the author or the subjects or the writers that you are referencing in the text. You want to end your conclusion paragraph with some kind of mic drop, and a mic drop is very similar to a hook. It's a very powerful statement. It could be a call to action, it could be a challenge that asks people to do something to change, their routine. Like if we're focusing on is technology good or bad? That's a very broad topic. Your mic drop could talk about maybe in order to reverse the effects of technology or social media on limiting one's attention span, people must, and then finish out the sentence. I don't know how great that was. That was literally just coming to me in the moment. So, yeah. In your conclusion paragraphs, avoid new ideas, avoid evidence, avoid quotes, avoid using contradicting or statements. Don't change the thesis statement after you've spent an entire essay talking about it. Don't use disclaimers, don't use apologies. You want to make sure that your intro and conclusion are symmetrical. This is why I said, intros and conclusions are inverses of each other. You want to mirror the approach that we used for the intro. We use the same concept, but in inverse form for the conclusion. So if you guys have any questions on how to format essays, what goes in what part of the essay, please do reach out. I'm always here to assist. Join us during office hours, and I'd be more than happy to look over any kind of preliminary drafts that you might have of any of your papers at any time. So never hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to provide feedback at any time. If you are all set with this, you are ready to move forward on to the next video.